In March 2024, Russian President Vladimir Putin broke all records of elections ever held in Russia. And once again I received a mandate from the people, as a source of power, to carry out my reforms. And the national leader himself answered the question of what reforms Putin is carrying out, and why they vote so massively for him. When asked what his dream is, Putin said the following: "I dreamed of a strong, independent, sovereign Russia. And I hope that the results of the vote will allow us all, together with the Russian people, to achieve these goals." And if Putin dreams of a strong sovereign Russia, it means that Russia was and remains not sovereign. There is a lot to say on this topic that Russia was turned into a colonial country in 1991, and these conversations were often perceived as conspiracy. But nevertheless, Putin has frankly confessed to you his main goal, his main dream, to make Russia independent, that is, to get it out of colonial slavery. And as we can see, he does it very well. Why it takes so long to answer is also a long time. But in short, there was and is very strong resistance, both within the country, for example, from the same pro-Western elites and from the West. The entire so-called Russian elite, in the 90s, was raised pro-Western, as were the officials, and the colonial system enriched them, gave them a lot, because they have all the money, families, houses, everything is in the West. Therefore, they strongly resisted the return of sovereignty. But Putin, like a boa constrictor, slowly but surely strangled all this elite. Moreover, you will probably be very surprised now how large-scale this person is in the entire history of the world. See, the hegemony of the West began to emerge about 500 years ago. To be more precise, it was on August 13, 1521, when the Spanish conquerors on the American continent captured, looted and destroyed the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan, and then their empire. This date can be considered a symbolic beginning of the era of Western domination. Since that time, Europeans have actively begun to capture and colonize other countries and peoples of the world. America, Africa, Asia, Australia, China, India. Over the past 500 years, the West has enslaved almost the entire world and actively exploited it. The greatness of a state over the past 5 centuries has been determined by how many colonies it has and how much treasure it is able to pump out of them to ensure its prosperity. The British Industrial Revolution would not have been possible without the brutal exploitation of India, which the British themselves called the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. This empire was the largest that had ever existed in world history. The British were followed by the French, the Dutch, the same Spaniards, the Portuguese, and even the Belgians, who quite recently, in the 60s of the 20th century, organized human zoos in their country. It follows from this that Western civilization, predatory in general, is aimed at capture and enslavement. This is their mentality. Relatively recently, the chief diplomat of the European Union, Joseph Borrell, said that Europe is a blooming garden. Well, regarding some countries, this is indeed the case, but the Borrell did not specify the reason for this very bloom. But Europe has flourished thanks to the centuries-old robbery of other peoples of the world. Imagine if wealth had been pouring into your city for centuries. Here is the whole secret of the development and wealth of developed countries. So the only country that the West could not defeat was Russia. Is that why every 100 years Europe unites and attacks Russia? This is how it is happening today. To put it cynically, there is nothing unusual about this. The West is a predator. There are predators in nature too. But Russia, due to its natural geographical location, also has its own mentality, which does not allow it to be captured. The harsh climate forces people to unite in order to survive, and this association greatly strengthens the state. In addition, Russia is a land power. The land power is the power that does not arrange interventions on foreign lands for the purpose of enslavement, located hundreds and thousands of kilometers away from it. Such powers conduct military operations near their borders. Therefore, being the only unconquered land state, Russia did not try to defeat the West to conquer it. I got away from him. Well, okay, move on. The mentality of Russians is like this. They have everything. They don't need anyone else, but if you come to them, then they will bury you. This was how they lived until 1917. When the West realized that Russia needed to be captured from the other side and by other hybrid methods. The February Revolution was largely planned at that time by the main empire on earth, Great Britain. Great Britain has put a lot of effort into destroying this country. After the ruins, Russia was reborn, but only in a new guise. The Soviet Union appeared, which already carried an ideological danger to the West. In the 20th century, the centers of power were finally determined. This is the West with America at its head and the socialist camp led by the Soviet Union. Once again, the states stood in their way, which they could not break during their hegemony. During the existence of the Soviet Union, the West was formally deprived of many colonies. Dozens of countries around the world are gaining their independence. and in many ways thanks to the Soviet Union. But it's not that simple. In parallel, the West is creating a new model of enslavement of peoples, economic and financial. After the Second World War, the Americans managed to impose their currency on almost the whole world, the dollar, through which the same robbery of enslaved countries has been going on as for the last 500 years. Everything is simple. A dollar can buy anything and anywhere. Americans can print it uncontrollably under the so-called debts of the state, which is exactly what they do. They print empty pieces of paper and suck out various tangible and intangible real goods from all over the world. But the Soviet Union did not allow them to do this in many regions of the world. To fight the Soviet Union, the West created a huge number of institutions so that they could scientifically figure out how to defeat the country of the Soviets. There were more than 1,000 such institutions, and they all worked to destroy the Soviet Union. In parallel, the directive of the National Security Council of America 20-1 was developed, which outlined a plan for the destruction of the Soviet Union. And again, this hybrid method of struggle has brought success to the West. In 1991, the Soviet Union was liquidated. All its parts, including Russia, were turned into colonies through various economic rules, the Fifth Column and the Constitution. During the reign of Boris Yeltsin, this was very pronounced. Russia was then ruled by pro-Western oligarchs, and in general, the whole world has become controlled by the West. America won then, but in the 2000th year, Russia is headed by Vladimir Putin, and as you understand, he headed a colonial, non-sovereign, semi-destroyed country, and his main dream was to make her strong and independent. As he himself just recently admitted, Putin was moving slowly but surely towards his dream. In 2007, after he defeated his ardent opponents inside the country, in Munich he declared that that world model of metropolises and colonies had outlived itself. The unipolar world proposed after the Cold War also did not take place. That is, Putin openly challenged the West in Munich. He officially stated that he wants to return Russia's independence. As previously mentioned, Russia has a good immunity in the fight against the West. Therefore, other colony countries, the so-called developing countries, slowly began to unite around Putin and Russia, which eventually resulted in the BRICS Union, the SCO, the Eurasian Union and the like. The West had a problem again, and again it was Russia. Once again, she has united other countries around her. What could the hegemon do? Right, fight with hybrid methods. To raise a fifth column in this country, that is, traitors, to strangle economically and create instability around the country and armed conflicts, which was actually done. But there is one problem. As you know, Russia has never been able to win wars. That's the property of the Russian people. When trouble happens, he mobilizes, wakes up, unites and acts as a single monolith. And then the war came. In Russia, the immune system of homeland defense immediately worked. The people mobilized under all the blows of the sanctions of all the so-called developed countries. Russia began to function even much more effectively than before them. People have finally figured out who Putin is and where he is leading the country. People saw that this is a real leader who has the goal of making the country great again. Russia is not at a crossroads, it is on the strategic path of its development. And he won't turn away from his path. That's why there was a record turnout and record support in the elections. Moreover, all these events inspired the rest of the countries outside the so-called Golden Billion so much that they wanted, together with Russia, to finally overthrow the 500 years of Western hegemony. Putin gently mentioned this in an interview with Dmitry Kiselev. This so-called Golden Billion has been practically parasitizing other peoples for centuries. They tore apart the unfortunate peoples of Africa, they exploited Latin America, they exploited the countries of Asia, and of course no one has forgotten this. I have a feeling that it's not even about the leadership of these countries, although this is very important, but ordinary citizens of these countries feel in their hearts what is happening. They associate our struggle for their independence and true sovereignty with their aspirations for their own sovereignty and independent development. But this is compounded by the fact that Western elites have a very strong desire to freeze the existing unfair state of affairs in international affairs. They've been used to stuffing their bellies with human flesh and their pockets with money for centuries. But they have to understand that the vampire ball is ending. Just think about what Putin said. It turns out that Putin is not only the leader of the Russian liberation movement, he is the world leader of the liberation movement, which says bluntly that the vampire ball is over. That is, the 500-year era of parasite dominance is over. The Russian president is right now changing the world order, which has been held for 5 centuries, before our eyes. In general, the most interesting thing is just beginning.